Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Just getting folks on here.
Good evening. April, I'm going to make you a co-host so you can share your screen.
Perfect. And can you hear me okay?
You sound great.
Perfect.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, it's 5:30. It looks like we've got everyone on here. I'll look to Cindy and see how we're doing in terms of getting started.
Ready when you are.
Okay, very well then. So I'll call to order the City of St. Helens Special City Council meeting Monday, January 31st, 2022. We don't have a screen share today for the remote access, but I'll direct folks to the city website and the agenda, which has the access information there. That's where people can link in. So with that, I'll move to the Pledge of Allegiance. If folks would mute your microphone and join with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And we'll move now to our roll call.
Mayor Ellsworth,
Here.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Here.
Councilor Hardy,
Here.
Hall,
Here.
Juteau.
Here.
Very good. We'll move to adoption of the agenda. I'll look to the city clerk to see if there are any changes to this evening's agenda.
There are none.
And with that, I'd entertain a motion for adoption of the agenda.
I move approval.
And a second.
I'll second.
Councilor Juteau,
Yes.
Hall,
Yes.
Hardy,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. And now we'll move to public comment. This is where under California law, public comments at special meetings are limited to subjects on the agenda only. Therefore, public comment will take place during consideration of the item. Each person's comments shall be limited to 4 minutes. So we'll move now to the item. This is item 6.1. This is discussion and direction regarding funding options to address city infrastructure deficiencies, including consideration of potential general obligation bond on the June 2022 ballot. And this I'll go to our city manager, Mr. Prestwich.
Thank you, Mayor. And good evening, everyone. Today is a continuation of last Monday's meeting of a workshop to really focus on potential funding approaches to addressing some of our utilities infrastructure and storm drain infrastructure. So April Mitz will be sharing her screen and assisting me with the presentation tonight, as will Ken Deeker. And we have our city engineer, Mark Rincon, available to answer questions about specific projects. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Our objectives are similar to last week's objectives on the second slide. That is to consider options for placement of a general obligation bond on the June 8th ballot and ballot language for that bond. Our format tonight is again similar to our prior meeting. We'll walk through some background briefly. We're going to share with you some specific projects that either need to be delivered through our water rates or through a conceptual general obligation bond or both. We're going to break down and isolate the water and sewer portion of that general obligation bond and contrast it with rates. And we've really worked hard to try to break these numbers down into some understandable details for the council members and the community. We're going to address and walk through some council policy that we have, talk through that, and then revisit the ballot question before having our discussion. So that's the format, and we'll start with a bit of background. So as I mentioned on our prior workshop, the city has done a lot of work on getting organized with respect to our obligations with our civic infrastructure, whether it's our buildings and other assets, as well as our underground utilities. And this work dates back to 2017-18, first with the SHAPE Committee, and following in 2020 with the Civic Infrastructure Task Force, which touched on strategies for revenue and also addressed and emphasized some concerns with our utilities infrastructure in particular. The council made it a goal in 2021 to talk about ways to develop a community-supported approaches to financing and funding our infrastructure deficiencies. And we conducted some opinion research in late 2021, presented that data on January 11th, held a workshop on January 24th, and we're back tonight to continue that discussion. So this is a list of the water projects that we are not recommending to include in a conceptual bond. And at our prior workshop, we did talk a lot about the storm drain infrastructure and also the water and the sewer and recycled water infrastructure. But a key element of our challenge over the coming 5 years is the significant scale of projects that loom ahead. And these are all important projects for the city. The good news is 6.18 million, these three projects here in the first row, first set of rows, these are already funded with the existing rates. So we have the ability to bond for and deliver these projects at these costs today. The second set of projects here, the next 5 projects that total $11.8 million, these are projects that likely are good candidates for the 2022 rate adjustments. So we're out to bid now on selecting a consultant to help us with our rate study, and with the goal of developing rates between now and the end of the year and implementing those rates near the end of the year, which would be a continuation of the 5-year rates that we have today. So it's just the 5 years are over. It's time to revisit our rates in the context of the projects that are coming down the road. And the first 2 items here are just incredibly important projects. We talked about this at the last meeting. The Rutherford Pipeline Replacement Project. This is the project, 12-inch line from Rutherford to St. Helena that delivers 1/3 of our water supply. And we know through experience with the water emergency that the city and its customers would yield tremendous efficiencies with the deployment of current generation, current technology water meters, smart water meters, where on our phones we have alerts that happen the moment we receive an alert on a water leak. It will save the city a lot of water. It will save customers a lot of money and water. It's a needed investment, and some other high priority projects in the next 5 years. The final set of projects here are projects that are significant, a significant scale. They need to be on our horizon. We think that they're projects that are so significant that in terms of delivery, that they will take a little planning over the next 5 years to get ready to deliver these projects. So there's going to be a need to get organized on this front, begin to think through initiating design on these projects. But these are expensive projects, but they're very important projects, including the replacement of our water treatment plant. So those projects total $16.77 million. So our focus over the next 5 years, again, is this $11.8 million in the middle.
Excuse me, I'm seeing Councilmember Hall has a hand up.
Thank you. City Manager, just one question. So the current rate adjustments blocked out here, 2022 and then 2027. Is there anything preventing us, other than more work, obviously, in doing additional rate studies, not waiting 5 years? Can we do a 2024 or 2025 and pick up half of these projects in box 3 and then do a 2027 adjustment as well?
I think the way I would prefer to answer that question is if we do the work correctly the first time, we can avoid having to come back within that 5-year time frame, and it's a lot of work to put these together. And there's a lot of stakeholder engagement that comes with it as well. And so it is possible for us to come back and revisit rates in the middle of the term. But if we do a good job of planning ahead, I think that we can anticipate those challenges and, if need be, adjust accordingly. And I'd invite our finance director, April Mitz or Ken Deeker, to assist with any additional comments you'd like to make on that question.
Yeah, thank you. I can definitely add a few more comments to the request by Councilmember Hall. What we do is when we do the 5-year rate study, it establishes the rates for 5 years. So every year we have an incremental increase. And so if we did try to layer it and do it every 2 to 3 years, at that point you're really only projecting out 2 years, 2 to 3 years at most. The whole process to do a rate study is typically about a year if you take going out for solicitation of bids into consideration as well, plus a very laborious Prop 218 hearings that we have to go through every time that we do a rate study. So those are just some considerations that I would caution the council. And then also some other questions. I definitely will turn it over to Ken Deeker if he has any comments regarding the capacity for bonding or for debt service, if that would need to be taken into consideration if we're really only establishing 2 to 3 year rates. So I'd like to see if Ken has any comments on that.
Thank you, April. Ken Deeker with Del Rio Advisors. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, April's correct on that. The time frame to do these rate studies, it is almost a year, especially with all the public meetings and sharing the information with the public to be transparent in the process. We do have to build up rates to a certain level to pay for future bonds. The problem that you run into is doing a bond issue, for example, if we do one in 2022 or 2023 to fund these 2022 projects, you have a reasonable expectation of spending the money within 3 years. That's to keep it tax exempt. So you wouldn't want to go out and do a bond that you're going to sit on for 5 years. And so it depends a lot on the timing of the projects, right? So if these really are in the 2027 and beyond timeframe, that can certainly be covered with a 2026 or 2027, rate study. And then you would issue the bonds when you're ready to actually spend the money. Again, you don't want to overfund. You don't want to pay interest on bonds until you're ready to actually spend the money. So it's kind of a timing issue. And I think this is the way that the staff has timed out these projects.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate all the feedback.
Okay, so the next slide, we're going to look at a conceptual general obligation bond. And this is a bond that staff is recommending. In looking through all of the water projects, what we tried to do was identify projects inside the city limits that had some additional city benefit that in some cases tie to the future road paving that we're doing, and address Bell Canyon as well. The sewer projects that we shared with you in the prior meeting are included, as well as the recycled pipeline that is really the first segment coming out of the wastewater treatment plant, along with a pump to deliver it to the recycled water line that's planned for Mills Lane that continues across the highway to Crane Park. So this was a concept that we're recommending from a community support perspective. What we're trying to develop is something that is consistent with the feedback that we received from the public opinion research, and at the same time balances the idea that a number of our projects, a significant number, in this case $11.8 million of forecasted projects on the water fund, for example, would be addressed through the water rates. So this is obviously a portion of the projects that are needed, but it totals about 3.7 million on the water projects here. So this is a concept that can be adjusted tonight, and we're looking for feedback on this. But we want to break these numbers down for you in finer detail, so we can come back to this slide at a later time. But these are similar to projects you saw on the prior at our prior meeting. And so why don't we go to the next slide? So I'm going to turn it over now to April and Ken Deeker to walk us through a couple of slides.
So thank you. So both, actually myself, Ken Deeker, and Mark Presswich, we've been working over the past week just to really kind of fine tune and hone in on some of these different various bonding scenarios for a GO bond. The assumptions that are in front of you tonight, it does assume it's a 30-year term. It doesn't assume for all three scenarios that it's layered debt. So there's 3 different debt issuances, just depending on the timing of the projects and the timing of when we actually need to have the cash to do the projects. It does assume a 4% annual assessed valuation growth, or AV growth. It does assume also a declining tax rate, which means you have your, and you'll see this in a chart that we have, which you have your three different issuances of debt, which brings your tax rate up to a peak, and then from then on out, after the 3rd issuance, it's a declining tax rate. So you'll see the tax rate per assessed 100,000 of assessed valuation starting to decrease. And it does also assume it's market plus 0.5% for the interest rates. So the 3 scenarios that we had run is we looked at 3 different go bond dollar amounts, just so everyone can get an idea of what we're looking at for the first year tax rate, for the average tax rate, and then for the maximum tax rate. So through 3 different tranches. So you'll see your go bond amounts on the left-hand side, which is your 10 million, your 15 million, or your 20 million. So if we're looking at the recommendations that Mark Presswich had shown before, the scenarios that we can consider, we really do want to look at this $20 million go bond scenario. So what this does is the next item that we'll look at is a tax rate per $100,000 of assessed valuation. So if you have a $1 million property, you basically take that tax rate times 10 to be able to get what that valuation is on a $1 million property. So if we're looking at the $10 million go bond, the first year tax rate would be 38 cents. If you're looking at the 15 million, it would be $3.62. And that does have to do with how the bonds are actually distributed in the first year, and Ken can definitely explain it a lot more eloquently than I can. And then if we have our 20 million, you're talking 44 cents per assessed 100,000 of assessed valuation in the first year. What we really want to look at is the middle, which is your average tax rate. So for a $10 million bond over the 30-year period, it's $7.84 for your average tax rate. $15 million bond is $11.55. And your $20 million bond is $15.22. What that $15.22 equates to is over the 30-year period, if you have a $1 million property for assessed valuation, it's about $150 per year that would be placed on that property for a go bond at the $20 million mark. And then the next column that we'll look at is your maximum tax rate. So on a $10 million bond, the highest tax rate you'd pay for $100,000 in assessed valuation is approximately $13.71. 15 million is $20.21. And then for the $20 million bond, it's $26.99. So again, if you look at, and that would be the highest 1-year period. So for 1 year at the $20 million bond issuance for a property with a $1 million valuation, it would be about $270 for that 1 year, and that would be the highest tax rate possible. So the next scenario, what this does, it actually layers all 3 of these together so you can graphically see what they look like. So your first rate, the blue line, that's your highest. So that's your $20 million go bond. The red is going to be your $15 million. And then the yellow is going to be your $10 million tax rate. And again, what we're focusing on here is just what's in the middle section, which is your average tax rate over that 30-year period. And you can see here here's your 3 different debt issuances. So this is your peak, and then here you'll see your declining tax rate, and you see when each of the three issuances actually drop off.
April, before we go much further, I have a question regarding the previous slide. Looking at the 10 million, the 15 million, and the 20 million. I'm just looking at the first year tax rate and wondering why the 15 million is significantly higher the first year than the 10 million and 20 million. Is there a reasoning behind that?
There
Mayor,
is, and
yeah.
I will turn it over to Ken Deeker for that.
Thanks, April. Yeah, April, if you could actually go to the next slide, I think it's a little easier to illustrate there. So if you look at the first year tax rate, I also included on this slide the year in which that tax rate is born. So for example, on the $10 million scenario, the first year's tax rate is 38 cents, but that appears in bond year 2024. The next one, the 15 million, the $3.62 is in bond year 2025. And the $20 million scenario is also 84 cents in bond year 2025. And it has to do with, as April intimated, has to do with the market acceptance. Market wants to have premium coupons. So you're going to sell these bonds at a premium. When you receive the premium from the buyers, you pay your underwriter's discount and your cost of issuance associated with the bonds, and then there's a pot of money left over. That's called a debt service fund, and it's used to pay the first year to 2 years of debt service on the bonds before anything would hit the tax roll. So depending on the amount of premium generated depends on what the first year's tax rate is going to be.
Okay, thank you.
Right. And I will actually go to the next slide, and I'm going to turn this over to Ken Deeker. What we did is we worked on isolating the water sewer analysis. So based on the potential items that could go on the GO bond, which equal that $19 million, what we tried to do is really isolate out. There's 3.69 million in the water side, and then 3.2 million on the wastewater side. So we tried to isolate out exactly what that would look like and what it would do to our current rates. And I'll let Ken Deeker speak on the slide a little more.
Thank you, April. Yeah, I mean, it's fairly self-explanatory. Again, what we were trying to do here is say, okay, here's the choice the council has. You can go ahead and put these projects into a GO bond, which Mr. Prestwich talked about earlier on and showed the various projects. Or if you don't put it in a GO bond, you put it into the rate side to be paid by your ratepayers. So we wanted to try to isolate what is the difference between doing this as a GO bond and doing it as a water and sewer bond for their respective systems. So again, it's 3.69 million in the water fund. We estimate that it would be about 3% per year revenue increases required. And then what Ms. Mitz did is she took the peak and off-peak current rates that are currently adopted after your last rate study and applied those increases to try to come up with a reasonable estimate of what we think that would look like over the 5-year period of the rate study. And we estimated that for the water customers, they'd be paying an additional $375 over that 5-year period. On the sewer side, again, the sewer fund's not quite as healthy, so it does need to generate some additional cash to maintain the council's policies. We're estimating the 3.21 million. Again, the council could decide to put it in a GO bond, or if they decide not to do that, to put it into the sewer fund. We estimate 6% per year increases, or about $418 over that 5-year period, just related to paying for those projects, right? That's what we're trying to isolate here. And the 5-year total cost for water and wastewater would be about $793 per customer over that 5-year period. Then we took the same amount and included it in a GO bond per $100,000 of value. So on $1 million home, we estimated, again, on the average tax rate for the $20 million bond was $5.84. So we estimated what that would be for each of the 5 years during that same period. And the total 5 years payments on that would be $292. Again, based on $1 million home. Now, a person who has a $2 million home or a $500,000 home can certainly do the math themselves. You simply take the tax rate and multiply it times your assessed value. It's relatively simple, per 100,000 of assessed value. But again, we wanted to try to isolate the impacts of including this in water and sewer versus funding it with the GO bond, just specifically that council question.
And it is also, I just want to point out that the analysis that we ran was on a typical single family home. So it's a single family home. So during the peak season, which is summer, it's 17 HCF per month. And then the off peak is 7 HCF per month. And again, this is on the current rates, the rate structure that we're currently in right now. I just wanted to let everybody know that that's typical. And what we did is we took that information as far as what a typical single family residential customer used, and that was included in our last rate study. So I did wanted to point that out real fast.
I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau.
Yes, thank you. I just had a quick question. For the water sewer rates, this increase that we're seeing, is this for every water customer?
It's the need to increase revenues by that amount each year to maintain the council policy. So that would be debt service coverage on the bonds, which is a council policy, as well as maintaining a sufficient level of reserve within each system. So the revenues would have to go up. And what we tried to do was to apply that to a single family residential. The actual rate consultant will come in and break that down by the various rate classes.
Okay, so it could be a different number for different.
It certainly could be a different number. That's in the more granular detail when the rate consultant gets on board.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring.
Just a clarification for those out in the public who are listening in. Could you explain the difference between assessed valuation and market value?
I'll take that one. Yes, thank you, Vice Mayor Doring. Assessed value is the number that the assessor's office at the county applies to our properties that we own, that an individual owns. And typically the assessed value is going to be lower than the actual market value. So the longer you've held your home in St. Helena, the more likely, due largely to Prop 13 from 1978, which limits the increase to no more than 2% a year on the assessed value. You're going to find that the market value could be north of $2 million or north of $4 million, but it's technically possible for the assessed value to be under $1 million. So typically you'll find the assessed value much lower than the actual market value. And this is a complicated slide, so I do want to make sure we pause here and encourage questions about this slide, because it does have a lot of information on it. And it was intended to essentially provide a contrast between applying these projects to the water rates and sewer rates, or deploying them through a bond concept. And again, as Ken Deeker indicated, in terms of the GO bond, customers with a lower assessed value could divide by 2 or 3, for example, and customers with a larger assessed value could multiply by 2 or 3 or whatever the factor is.
Thank you. I just want to also let folks know we're going to go through this presentation and then we will open it for public comment. So I just want anybody on the line to know that.
Okay. Not sensing any more questions, we'll move on to the next Vice Mayor Doring.
I apologize. Do you happen to have an example of a typical rate pair? So this is just, as I understand it, these numbers are actually only focusing in on the increase caused by the projects themselves, or paying for those projects. So you have to add that to the existing rates that would be paid. Do we have any sort of examples there, just in rough estimates of what a typical situation would look like? Thank you.
I do have that. Let me stop sharing this screen and get to another screen.
And I'll just
Mark,
jump
did you
in.
have anything else?
I just want to jump in for a second. Every person will be different. This is the assumption of water use is what we used in our rate study from 2017. So the same assumptions on water use in the summer and the same water assumptions for use in the winter are part of this analysis. So if you use more than that, every customer will be different. No one will hit these numbers exactly. This just happens to be the average. And April is going to bring up another example, I think.
Great. So what we also did as well, so we know the first slide that you saw with all of the water projects that are not included in the bond, if you look at just the short term, which would be included in the next rate study, so not including what's already in the current rate study or the additional projects that we're looking at for 2027 and beyond, it's $11.8 million. What that represents, it would be a 4% increase in revenues and loosely equates to a 4% increase in rates. So that would add an additional $400 over a 5-year period off of the current rates. And then if we also look at the water side, so now we're taking the 3.69 million, which you saw in the other slide, which is isolated, and adding the 11.8 million, you'll see that the difference is $495. So you can see the difference. Oh, please ignore line 44. But you see the difference. It goes, from just the $11 million to, $400 or $495 if you include the 3.69 million plus the 11.8 million. So I hope that answers your question.
I think, Mr. Doring, this is Ken Daker. April, I think you were starting off of the base, which is the 2022 rate. Could you bring up those 2 slides that you showed from the rate studies? And I think that would answer Mr. Doring's question.
Thank you.
Hopefully they're fairly accessible.
Is this the slide you're referring to?
No, the one from the rate study. The 2022 rate from the rate study.
It was a page deep in the document that we were looking at earlier.
Oh, let me
It was a
find that.
slide. I think we found it.
Yes,
we pulled it off of the website.
Yes. I just want to make sure I'm going to my right screen here. Is this the slide you're referring to?
Yes.
Yeah. So what this shows is the red rate here, where in 2018, the dot, that was the current fiscal year 17 rates. And then the green was the adopted rates, because we had the original adopted rates and then we went back to City Council and made some adjustments. And so this is now, the blue area is what is the current rates. So it's taking that $115 for a winter single family home bill using 7 HCF. And then the second one is for the single, so it's the peak versus the off peak, is $193 under the current rate structure under this scenario.
Got it. Understood.
So now we're going to transition and speak to you about our policies. And April will walk us through 4 slides, I believe.
So at the special council meeting we had last Monday, Councilmember Doring did ask about the City Council policy and whether it's allowable in the policy to be able to pay for water wastewater enterprise fund projects utilizing other funding mechanisms such as the general fund or the GO bond. And so what we did is we did take a closer look at the policy, and we did confirm with both with Ken Deaker as well as our bond counsel that we've used. There is nothing in our current debt covenants that does not allow the City Council to provide the policy to be able to go forward and issue GO bonds in order to pay for certain water wastewater projects. However, City Council adopted policy, and again, these are policies adopted by City Council. City Council can't update and change the policies as they deem necessary. But the current financial policy we do have, it was established in November of 2018. And part of the purpose, overview, and scope of the policy, it does state that it includes statements and principles that are designed to guide the city in maintaining its financial stability and delivering high quality services to the public. So that's just overarchingly the purpose of the policies. Further in the City Council policy, so if you do look at Section 3, Policy C, which is specific to capital improvement programs or the capital improvement projects, bullet point number 3 does say capital improvements that specifically benefit a select group of users and or are fee for service based are to be financed through user fees, service charges, special assessments and taxes or development fees. And then additionally, section 5 or number 4 says capital improvement projects that specifically benefit a fee-for-service enterprise operations such as water, wastewater are to be financed through the service fees generated within that operation and fund. Such fees should be supported by periodic updates to the related utility master plan. Additionally, in the city council policy, so under section 3, policy G, which is debt management, I do want to point out that there is a section in that policy, and again, it's council adopted policy, that does state the purpose for which long-term debt may be appropriate include the following. And I wanted to really focus on that the total debt does not constitute an unreasonable burden to the city or its taxpayers and ratepayers. So something to definitely take into consideration whenever you are looking at adopting new rates, that is it actually burdensome to the ratepayers. So based on that information, and also City Manager Prestwich had consulted with our city attorney as well to see under the council policy right now, what can be done if the council does want to provide direction to include certain water and or sewer projects in a GO bond. The consideration would be for council is to potentially update the policy to include the following language in red, where when you're looking at the capital improvement side for how you fund CIPs, is to keep the same language as capital improvements that specifically benefit a fee-for-service enterprise operations, such as the water or wastewater, are to be financed through the service fees generated within that operation and fund, and then adding the language unless authorized by voters. And so that way it does give a little more flexibility to the policy, but then it also does give the power and control to the voters, saying that they're the ones that do have to authorize other funding mechanisms. So that's just a brief overview on the council policy, and I'd like to see if there's any comments or questions on that before we move on to the next slide. Okay, seeing none, I'll move on to the next slide. So this, I will turn it back over to City Manager Prestwich.
Thank you, April. So we have updated the question to reflect essentially a $20 million bond concept, and have used the average rate of approximately $15 for $100,000. So these are the numbers that have moved. The remainder of the question is the same. We've just updated the dollars related to this, and this is essentially, we tested a $54 million ballot question concept when we did the opinion research. This is a $20 million, this is an adjustment down to a $20 million level. And then I think the next slide is to talk about discussion and direction. And it would be helpful, I think, for us to go back to the list of projects in the conceptual bond and use that as a source of initiating a council conversation about this.
Thank you. Thank you very much for presenting this. And we'll see if there's council comment here. I had a few just initial comments. One of the things I know that we had sort of found consensus perhaps last week on the stormwater issues, and so want to have a deeper conversation here as we talk about how a GO bond may apply to water projects, and with the added language in the policy. The other aspect that I thought was of value, and I don't know if there seems to be an added benefit of our roads getting attention when we deal with things like storm drains and replacing pipes, that there's a benefit to repaving of our roads. Have we looked at any value to that road aspect being part of a bond question?
In talking this through further with our city engineer and our city attorney, when we make the cuts into the street, the street would need to be repaired, particularly with the storm drains, and including having the ability to repave the street within the use of the bond is something that we would expect to write into the bond. The alternative would be to fund it through the general fund or through Measure T resources that are associated with street repair. And so when we open up the projects, the street projects, the sewer, water, storm drain, those cost estimates include repairing the street.
And I'm just wondering if there's an attractiveness to that might be part of the bond question to the voters, if they knew this also might benefit the roads. That was just a perspective or a question to think about. And I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you. I think my question may already have been answered, but just to be sure, I was wondering whether for any given project that involves going underground to replace a storm drain or a sewer line or a water main, if repaving wouldn't be part of the project description and part of the whole bid package, and thus part of what we're funding when we put these big numbers up on the screen.
I can answer that. Councilmember Hardy, typically for city standards, it is you cut the trench, you put in your pipeline, you fill the trench, and you pave basically the trench width plus 6 inches on each side. So not necessarily are you replacing the whole width of the roadway with pavement.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there additional council questions or comments at this point? And if I'm not seeing any, we can go to the public and see if there is input from the public. So I'll look to our city clerk.
Arlene, I'm going to allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself, and you have 4 minutes.
Good afternoon, good evening. In this whole discussion, as a taxpayer of St. Helena, I'm extremely interested to know what percentage of our water goes to users outside of the city limit, because we are asking St. Helena tax the bill when the people outside of the city limit will not be footing the bill. Now, if this is 2% of the water users, I understand. But if we're talking about 30% or so of the water users, I don't understand. The second point is that many of the users outside of the city limit are big corporations. Look at Meadowwood. Look at the halls. Now, we would be essentially doing all of this retrofitting and work for people who won't pay a dime for this. And yet the city council doesn't seem to be upset by this. So that's my question.
Thank you. I'll look to the city manager in terms of responding.
Happy to respond now, or if there's additional comment, capture all questions and respond later.
Oh, okay, so we'll do it that way. We'll capture the questions and then we'll respond. So I'm looking to our city clerk to see if there's additional public comment.
There is. Nancy, you can unmute yourself and address the council.
Hi, good evening. I'm wondering if a bond, or however you resolve the financing, if there were a move on the city's part to adopt a different method of assessing water rates, such as how Napa is done, where there are service charges based on meter size and tiered rates, higher usage for people that are outside the city limits and or that require pumping to go uphill and so forth and so on. So there's been a lot of talk about how you guys want equity for everybody and that water rates need to be bearable. And particularly, for example, senior citizens who are on fixed incomes that have maybe lived in their homes for decades. And as prices keep going up and their fixed income does not, it can be unbearable. So I'm just wondering, why can't St. Helena follow suit like Napa has and make water rates equitable based on whether you live in St. Helena city limits or outside, how far the water has to go, does it have to go uphill, and all the rest of it. And would passing a bond measure based on your current rate system preclude changing the method of assessing water rates? Thank you.
Thank you. And I can say that we are currently getting the proposals in for the new rate study. And those are questions that can be put to those who have put the proposals in, what their methodologies are, and that can be part of the discussion of how we move forward on that. And that is upcoming as we speak. I'll look to our city clerk.
Mark, I'm going to allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi, Mark Smithers here. I'm really struggling with the level of detail and information we're getting to make such an important decision. I haven't heard over the last two meetings to what extent you've included the $5 million of penalties that have been assessed but maybe not collected. I don't know how you are adjusting what needs to be funded or is unfunded based on the $10 million water enterprise cash balance. I don't see how you've reviewed the existing potential for rate increases, or maybe not at all, because the last rate study included $20 million of capital projects, but obviously we haven't done those $20 million of capital projects. I think you really are in a difficult position. I don't know how you can make a decision on what to fund through a GO bond or a revenue bond, and I'm very much against a GO bond for water and water enterprise, without actually some sort of level of review of and remodeling the rate study that we had. The slide that April sort of shot in there that said something about, oh, here's what a resident maybe would pay, included an additional $11 million, not the 3.9. So you really didn't do an apples to apples comparison of a GO bond for a resident versus a revenue bond for a resident of typical size. And then something was said about debt covenants, don't require us to use a revenue bond, but debt covenants aren't policies. I'm really struggling with this whole entire thing. It's such a mishmash, and we get the presentation, I don't know, maybe it was a half hour, an hour before, such an important topic. And the whole presentation is slanted towards a GO bond to cover water rate increase, water improvements, but there's really no apples to apples. It seems like we're trying to put lipstick on a pig. I'm really struggling with the lack of transparency and information that exists with this entire thing. I can go through a whole litany of things. You can pay off the debt service on the existing bond with a new bond, and then now you've got the debt service of $1.6 million in your cash flows into the future, because the water department is actually cash flow positive. So this thing is so big, and for you guys to make a decision to put a GO bond on the ballot in June to cover some water infrastructure, when quite frankly, we need a lot more water infrastructure than you're talking about, I struggle. And the point has not been made that from 1990 to 2011, in 1990, the fixed charge for water was $10, up to, in 2011, $15. Yes, now it's 68 or 69, but obviously, we way underpaid what we should have been paying for fixed rate charges. So, there needs to be some reconciliation of what's happened over the last 30 years and really what the needs are of the water, the water enterprise. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments. And I'll look to city clerk to see if there are additional public comments.
Yes, Tom, you can unmute yourself and address the council.
Yes, hello, can you hear me, please?
We can.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to reiterate what, I'm not an accountant, but what Mark Smithers said. We're sitting here listening to this conversation, and the public is at a real disadvantage over this whole situation in trying to understand what's going on. But I'm going to go ahead and also echo some of the things that Nancy Durbin said. And bear with me as I read this because I'm not always very good at articulating my thoughts. During last Monday night City Council workshop, the idea of increasing water rates during the city next utility rate study was discussed as a way to pay for the long list of deferred water capital improvement projects in St. Helena. I'd like to remind the city and the water customers who are listening tonight that St. Helena already has one of the highest water rates in the Bay Area. If City Council determines that this is the best way to pay for the long list of capital improvement projects, I would like to suggest that the city look at its current inequitable water rate structure. And I realize Mr. Ellsworth said that we're going to be talking about that in November or December, but the time is now to get the documentation. During 2016's utility rate study, the city admitted there are 4 elevation zones where it costs the city more to provide water service. In Napa, outside city water customers pay about a 40% premium for their water service than inside city water customers pay. Customers living at high elevation zones also pay a surcharge. Proposition 218 allows local agencies to charge for water customers more for water service if the cost of service is more expensive. Both Napa, Yountville, and American Canyon all employ tiered water rates in their water rate schedules. Residential water customers with 1-inch water meters also pay a much larger base rate in many cities. And why hasn't our city tried to make its water rates more equitable? Is it because St. Helena doesn't maintain accurate records of the actual cost of providing service to the diversified customers? I remember in 2016, City Council approved all St. Helena water customers to subsidize Meadowood's past $50,000 annual surcharge. This is technically a violation of Proposition 218. The bottom line is, if City Council decides increasing water rates is the best way to pay for all deferred capital improvement projects, I would like to ask the Council to require city staff to pay closer attention to the different costs of providing water service to its customers. About a year ago, I asked the city's finance director if the city's water department employees documented their work activities and the amount of time servicing outside city water customers. I was told that she didn't think they were. If the city wants to have more accurate water rates, all costs of service need to be documented more accurately to comply with Proposition 218, and this needs to be started before the next rate study, or we won't have the documentation. And lastly, in the few seconds that I have left, I don't understand why the city hasn't talked about a revenue bond as compared to a general obligation bond. Can you please explain why that comparison hasn't been brought up? And thank you very much.
Thank you for the comments. Just for clarification with the city manager, we're moving more quickly in terms of the water rates than November, December. We're on track to get into that fairly soon here. Is that my understanding?
We've received proposals for our RFP, so now we're going to review those proposals and we'll eventually bring a recommendation back to the council for entering into an agreement, and then a process begins to begin that study. But the timeline would include trying to be ready to have a rate adjustment in time for the annual adjustment in November.
So before then we would get to it. The other, we have discussed a revenue bond in balance with the GO bond. That has been part of this discussion. And I guess first I'll see if we have additional public comment. I'll look to our city clerk.
There is no other, we do have additional comment. Oliver, you can unmute yourself and address the council.
Hi, everybody. It's Oliver Caldwell, Mayor, Council, City Manager. Sorry to lose you, Mark. I've been in Santa Barbara for a while, but I've moved back. And so I don't know exactly what I want to say, but it's along the lines of I just don't feel confident that the research done to test the voter acceptance of a bond is going to be sticking. I think what we're asking is a big buy-in from the public that I think is a little bit in the dark. When I talk to a lot of people about the issues that go on here, as far as the deferred maintenance and unfunded pension plan, and we still got a city hall that's burned out, and we're like tenants for a while, and we did a lot of work in the SHAPE committee identifying all those deficiencies and all the broken assets that we'd have to repair. And a lot of people just are not keeping up with the information. A lot of people are in the dark. Some are apathetic, some don't care, some do care, some have given up, some have become cynical. And so what we're asking is a big majority of the people to buy in on whatever you guys are going to come up with. And I know how this town works. You think you got the buy-in, and then on the 5-yard line, the ball gets fumbled. And then you get a huge backlash, because this town is notorious for people going around with bullhorns and stirring up mud and creating a lot of disinformation and cynicism. And so the public doesn't know what to do because they don't have all the facts. And so they don't have a good analysis to be able to make a good choice when they want to vote to increase their property taxes or their water rates, things like that. So what really frustrates me is that we've spent so much money on economic development and real estate advisory services like EMG when I was on the SHIP committee. Then we had Gates Associates, Cosmot, we had Nolan Tam, and we probably spent $750,000 on consultants. And, we don't have a lot to show for it. We blew $1 million on a legal settlement at the hall. So we've gone through maybe a couple $1 million and another $1 million to do the general plan. And yet, how much money are we putting into marketing and promulgating the issues of the city that it faces and what the council has to face? Our website is not very good. It's hard it's like a crazy minefield. It's hard to go through there and find things that you need. I just find that when I talk to people, you really got to dumb it down into something really simple for them to digest. What are the big issues here? And what we're doing is we're tackling just part of the issues. They don't know all the issues. All the issues, as far as eventually we're going to have to deal with the fire department, as far as the payroll, we're going to have to eventually build a city hall. I mean, you can't be a tenant forever. And you're going to have to, restore Lyman Park, and the fire department's going to need fixing, and it goes on and on and on the list. And so what's happening is I think the public needs to see the broad picture of what's the total bill. It's just like if I had a house and I didn't take care of it for 40 years. And then suddenly the contractor says, you need to fix the roof. It's going to cost you $40,000. I think, okay, I'll take a loan. I'll fix the roof. But if he came back and said your foundation's broken too and your electrical's shot, you're going to need all new plumbing, I'd probably say, maybe I don't want to borrow the money. Maybe I'll sell the house. In other words, with more information, I'm making a better decision for myself. I know as an employer with my employees, if I don't tell them all the issues when I make big decisions that affect their lives, I don't get the buy-in. And what I'm asking you is to really come up with a plan to address all these issues and figure out how to educate the public. We can't depend on the Star. We can't depend on Nextdoor. I know you want to cut me off, but you really got to spend some money on marketing these issues. Otherwise, it's going to flop. People are not going to follow you. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments. And Ed, it's not intending to cut anybody off. We have a 4-minute that we try to apply equally. So thank you for the comments. Are there additional public comments?
There is no additional public comments.
Okay,
unless you want to allow Nancy to speak.
No, I think if somebody already spoke, then we're going to get into an ongoing issue. So I think if additional comments, folks if they have additional input, if they can send it in, I think is the way to do this.
Okay, there's no other public comment.
Okay, great. So we'll bring it back, and then open this up to the council, I just want a couple of thoughts here. In looking at two of the questions that have come up is, how do we balance a GO bond, a GEO bond with a revenue bond based on the upcoming rates, and looking for how those balances would work. And then also the question that's been concerning to folks is, does a GEO bond, as we apply it to water issues, does that create some inequities? But are there ways of sort of mitigating any inequities within that? I also, we recognize on the policy, the change in the policy to put in the wording that if the community votes for it, that's a way to move something forward. But do we have any more input about how to perhaps balance on the water side? If we all last week were there in terms of consensus regarding storm drains, can we get someplace with water where we see that there's a way to find some equities there that are acceptable?
Mayor, I don't know whether you would like me to walk through the questions that were asked, or to begin sort of a different approach about the revenue bond, because, and that may be a good place to start, and then I can maybe go through the answers that I would provide with respect to the questions, and I'm going to ask for a little bit of help. But with respect to the revenue,
if you give a little that first and then go to the questions, I think that's just fine.
Okay. So with respect to a revenue bond, that's really the alternative to a general obligation bond. And so these projects are going to be funded generally by either water rates and sewer rates, typically. That does not apply to the storm drain projects. They are unfunded. But with respect to the water and sewer rates, we said last week and we said this week, all of those can be delivered through the water rates. And essentially, and Ken Deeker can elaborate on this, but essentially, depending on the cash position of the water fund or the sewer fund, as well as the bond capacity that we have, the rates can support the debt service for, the city could issue revenue bonds to under the water enterprise as well as the sewer enterprise. And there was a comment today, one of the public comments mentioned a $10 million cash surplus on the water fund. And I think we want to, I'm looking at the director of admin services, that was a number that was accurate, but it doesn't then take into consideration the delivery of the York Creek Dam project, I believe, and the cash balance has dropped to.
The cash balance has dropped. Yeah, because the audited financials is where the $10 million has come from. And so we do have at the end of fiscal year 20, the audited financials, we do have a $10 million cash fund balance. However, in fiscal year 21 is when we have the completion of Upper York Creek Dam. So you do have anywhere between $4 to $5 million that is going to be taken off of that $10 million cash balance. And so there is definitely going to be a decrease that we're going to be seeing as soon as our other audited financials come out.
So what we've done is we've modeled what we've modeled on the water rates as well as the sewer rates. If we approach these projects via the water and the sewer rates, we can talk to you about there's an incremental increase. It's not much on the water rates or the sewer rates, but there's an increase above what we shared with you tonight. And if they're delivered through the general obligation bond, then you don't have to have the rates on the water side and the water and wastewater go up as much in order to deliver those projects. We can answer specifically what those numbers are tonight and share that. And Ken Deeker can explain how the cash balance, sometimes we pay as we go, and sometimes the water or the sewer enterprise would bond through a revenue bond for delivery of some projects. And why don't I walk through the questions and the answers briefly, Mayor, if that's okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. So there was a question about the percentage of customers outside the city under the city water enterprise, and the answer is 15%. That also seems to be approximately the same for the volume of water for our unincorporated customers as well. There was a question related to do some cities apply a different methodology? They can't apply tiered rates, but if there is methodology that supports, and there was a comment about high water users or outside the city or properties at elevation that might have a pumping cost associated with them. so long as the city can support and document the costs associated with those types of differences under Prop 218, that can be integrated into the rates. But that's a conversation that will have to mature over the course of the water rate and sewer rate discussion.
And I'm sorry, Prestwich, just to clarify, tiered rates can also be a part of that conversation with the new rate structure.
I'm going to ask our city attorney or our finance director, admin services director to answer that.
April, do you want me to cover that? Sure. Well,
Yes, that would be great.
So Mayor, I think it kind of depends what we're talking about when we're talking about tiered rates, but we can talk about, as part of the analysis, some variables in the rates based on kind of the impacts to the water system. I think the concern that Mr. Prestwich is referencing is the kind of the tiered rate structure that was at issue in the San Juan Capistrano case from a few years ago. And we need to be wary of structuring rates in that manner. But, as part of the conversation, we are going to, move forward with whatever analysis that needs to be done under Prop 218 and bring options to the council as part of that conversation.
Okay, thank you. And the concern in Prop 218 Capistrano was that the tiered rates were unsupported by data. Is that my understanding?
They were not supported by data that reflected the impacts on the system that the various users had. It was really they set different tiers kind of as a means to incentivize lower water use, and then based on the court's ruling, at least the people in the higher tiers were paying more than their fair share of the costs on the system.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Prestwich, please.
There was a comment about a surcharge or a premium for outside water users in the city of Napa, and there are cities that do have a different rate for outside water users, but they need a study to support that methodology. When I worked for the city of Napa, the surcharge was 25%, and I don't believe it's changed. It's just today they have done some additional analysis to support the supplemental costs for their outside the city water customers. Looking at my notes here. I think that's most of what I see that we can provide answers to.
About the water penalty issue, Mark.
Oh, that's a good, yes. With respect to the penalties, that number is a bit in flux because there are some adjustments that continue to occur, and our admin services director can share with us the approximate dollar today. We have not had the policy discussion about how the council would choose to use those proceeds, but those proceeds we've discussed internally. We would likely recommend that they be included in the water fund. So, April, what is the current approximate penalty total?
I don't have that information right on hand. Because there's definitely a difference between the total penalties we've charged versus what we've actually collected. And as City Manager Prestwich said, it is constantly moving every time that we have another adjustment that we've been made. But he is correct also, we've talked about internally, because we have had revenue losses due to people conserving water, which was great. So to utilizing some of the funds to offset the loss in revenues for both the water and the wastewater fund. But that is going to be a future council policy discussion. And
I think the approximate number is going to land somewhere between $3 to $5 million after the adjustments are addressed. So we're based on the recent billing that we applied for customers that weren't able to fully participate in the water penalty forgiveness program. We have some bills that have gone out the door, and in some cases, some of those bills are being adjusted based on new information that's been shared with the city. And the numbers that have been collected to date, I think, approximate $500,000 to $600,000 of the $3 to $5 million in penalties.
Is there any input here from council regarding the potential question, the bond question, or how we might look at integrating some of the water aspects into the bond? Last week, as we talked about it, there was sort of a point there we didn't get past, but is there some conversation about what might work? I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you. Well, we've received a lot of comments, and they touch on many different aspects of what's in front of us tonight. So I think we are necessarily facing a fairly complex discussion here moving forward. I'll start with sort of the factors that are most important to guiding my thinking about this, and then offer some particular thoughts. I continue to believe, as I said in our last meeting, that generally speaking, I think we should operate our enterprise funds as is generally advised by the experts, with the costs coming entirely from rates. I also believe we need to recognize and respond pragmatically when we're faced with a situation where strict adherence to that guidance will lead very likely to a bad result. And I think that's a situation we're in today, for a whole variety of reasons, the roots of which in many cases are decades old, even 40, 50 years old. We're faced with pretty daunting accumulation of infrastructure projects, capital improvement projects. And this is true for the water system and the sewer system. It's also true for things that cannot be paid for by water rates and sewer rates, like our storm drains. So that is a challenging situation. And it is my understanding that our efforts to fund our storm drains with a general obligation bond measure are likely to fail unless we include projects that relate directly to our residents' greatest concerns about infrastructure, which have to do with water security and fire security. So that's one reason for looking at adding water and perhaps sewer projects to the general obligation bond. And we also have concerns about the challenges for our customers, especially our low income or fixed income customers, on the rate side of things, if water and sewer rates have to bear all of the water and sewer infrastructure costs. So those are two reasons for considering a broader approach to the GO bond than just putting the storm drains in it. I take Mark Smithers' comments very seriously in that there is a lot of uncertainty regarding where we end up with water rates in any one of these scenarios. And to some extent, that's just inherent in the whole situation. We don't know what the rates will be without a rate study. We don't know how the costs are going to be segregated and what that's going to mean in terms of the potential for a geographical cost distribution. I think that's fundamentally what we're talking about with some of these particular factors that have come up, as for example, elevation zones and distance-related pricing, which is how I view the whole subject of inside or outside the city limits. I personally think the city boundary is irrelevant. There are some places, as an example, we have customers closer to our water treatment plant than any residents of the city of St. Helena. We have customers inside the city of St. Helena who are farther away from our centers of distribution and our corporation yard or any other cost-related factor you can think of than certain customers outside the city limits. So I think the references to city limits are distracting and unhelpful, but I do think we should be looking hard at geographical cost distribution. I think distance is one factor to look at. And I want to refer to Tom Belt's concerns about how we organize the information that's necessary to segregate costs in a manner that's in sync with the rate study considerations. So if we don't have records that segregate the costs for serving a customer 10 miles away versus a customer 1 mile away, then we don't have the information we need to do that kind of distance-based analysis. So I do want to call out that I think the coordination of cost segregation in terms of how our departments are keeping track of costs, the record keeping part of it, with what needs to happen in a rate study in which the council is looking for evaluation of some of these geographical cost distribution questions. I think that's really important. And I think Tom Belt is right to remind us, not for the first time, but probably for the 10th or 20th, that's a concern. On the subject of the equities and inequities of one approach versus another, there I think we have to face some real limitations. Most projects that are really important to our water system infrastructure are going to benefit the whole system. That may not be true for all of them. We may have some projects that fit within the limitations of a GO bond where the benefits are entirely within the city limits, but I'm sure that's not true for everything we've got on our target list. And I think if we want to move forward in the way that's been proposed, we have to accept that limitation, not sort of talk around it. I think the reality is that something like the approach recommended by staff offers big benefits to all of our residents. It comes at a certain price, perhaps, in terms of what is, to some extent, a subsidy of customers outside the city limits, but the alternative may be worse. And that's the only reason we're having this conversation, is that absent a package of improvements that has real appeal to a majority of our voters, some of the things that we desperately need to get done may not get done. And that's a really good reason for looking at what's been proposed. And I think we need to do that. I think we need to scrutinize the list here tonight and make our conclusion based on our best sense of what serves the greater good for the community of St. Helena. With respect to the GO bond, when we look at water rates, when we look at projects funded by water rates, we have to prioritize according to what benefits the entire system there. And yes, we end up with two different populations, one paying for one set of projects and another paying for a different set, and with some overlap in terms of the water system and potentially the sewer system. But if that's what gets everyone the best result, including all of the residents in this city, then, and if that's our conclusion, if we look at the facts, listen to all the information that's been presented, and that's our conclusion, then that's what we need to say. And that's the message we have to take forth to our community. I would also say, I think it's really important, to the extent it's possible, that we find an approach here that we can all stand solidly behind. And that may not be possible, but it certainly will make a big difference, again, for our ability to benefit the entire community.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Hardy. And I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau.
Yeah, I just have a brief comment. In a perfect world, I would like it to be the increase through the water rate, so everybody's paying the same amount. And I just don't see how that's possible with how high the water rates are going to go, and knowing that our water is already so expensive. And when I look at these numbers that we were presented here today, it looks to me like this is something that we can move forward. And that is why I wanted to get it on the upcoming ballots initiative, so that the voters could weigh in on it. And then we could really, if it passed, take action on all of these critical projects that I see as such an incredible challenge, and really puts us in a bad spot if we don't start moving on them. So this is not perfect at all. I wish we didn't have to make this choice. And I see it as what's in front of us as the best choice for us to be able to move forward and really address our challenges, knowing that we will also need to have a water rate increase, and that's coming additionally to this.
Thank you.
And I would just say, I like the sample ballot question. When I see that, it's compelling to me. It makes the case. I know that we have so much more to do in terms of communicating to the public. I think Oliver is right. Most people, this is so big, it's hard for us to wade through it, all of us, with all of the information. It's really dense. There's a lot of different factors. So I think tonight it would be great for us to to come to an understanding of what we're doing and then how we're going to communicate about it.
Thank you. Additional council comment. So a thought then is from Councilmember Hardy is identifying perhaps where those water or water sewer projects that might overlap, identifying those. In terms of the ballot question doesn't need to necessarily identify those projects, but do we have an ability or the mechanism to tie the ballot question directly to specific projects? I'll ask the city manager and the public works director.
I'll answer that. In terms of projects, typically these bonds would not identify line item by line item what the projects are, but the city would be able to adopt a resolution that says these are the projects we would like to spend the money on, and these are the permissible uses of the money. That would be part of the language within the ordinance that's adopted by the council, subject to voter approval. And I'll pause there and ask our city attorney if he'd like to elaborate on anything else I've said there.
No, I think that pretty much sums it up. I would just say, in general, we do generally structure these things so there's some level of flexibility, because the projects, while they are kind of in the pipeline, I guess you would say, they haven't formally been approved yet. And so we do offer, through these financing mechanisms, a little bit of flexibility in terms of how we describe them typically. So that is one of the things that we take into account when we are kind of framing the question.
And I see Councilmember Hall go right there, but just for a little clarification. So in a sense, we would dual track with a resolution that would identify some specifics, but that would not be part of the bond question.
Correct.
Okay.
And we can itemize with, for example, the list of projects that we have tonight, the conceptual proposed list. We can itemize those in a resolution that essentially explains that that's your planned expenditure plan for the bond proceeds.
That was basically going to be my comment, I guess, or encourage us to be as clear as we possibly can. It sounds like we do need to leave some flexibility. Obviously, our estimates right now are ballparks, and B, there's perhaps some other CEQA issues that may arise later as we move through approving projects. But I just think that the clearer we can be with our constituents on what we are saying this tax is going to afford, I think the better. However close to that line we can get would be great. So if it's this list before us tonight, then that's where our conversation is. This is really what we're saying we're going to be spending the money on. And I think we should get as close to that as we possibly can. One other quick comment on the language of the ballot measure itself. Just going back to that slide, it says St. Helena Water Service Protection. And I know this was worked over. It's got to be a certain number of words, etc. But in the middle of this, it says keep sewage, pollution, trash, chemicals from local rivers, creeks, streams. Is the city currently polluting anywhere that we're aware of? Or is this simply in reference to periodic leaks, failures where we have line breaks, etc.? What does this refer to?
This is a reference to, go ahead, Mark, if you'd like.
Yeah, sure, I could take that. Thank you, Councilmember Hall. It's mostly focused at our stormwater collection system. There are standards today that our older system does not meet. So this, we would, if any redesign of the infrastructure would include these items, such as, well, for the sewage, of course, tighten up our pipes, but for pollution, trash, and chemicals, we would put some certain measures on our stormwater collection system to minimize those items.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rincon. And those the scope of what you're talking about, you envision as being included on the project list on the other page.
That's correct. Is any redesign and any reconstruction of a stormwater system would include the latest technology, separators, and whatnot for the system.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. In terms of looking at the conceptual bond, the slide that has the title conceptual bond with the projects, is that a place to start for us to look at is this comprehensive in a way that gives us what we feel will give the public an assurance that the funding this is where it's heading? And I'd certainly want to get the council members' take on this, as well as our public works and city manager, just in terms of is this framed in a way that we can work with?
I would agree that the funding is definitely good for us to get started on many of these projects, if not all of them. It's just the only thing that concerns me as director of public works is the staffing level that we have. Right now, we have no staff engineers except for myself as the city engineer to deliver this vast amount of projects in 5 years. So that's my only concern, and we'll address that at future council meetings, obviously.
Thank you. I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau.
Thank you. I just want to be clear if I heard right. So what you're saying is that this is a list of projects, but we don't know if we can complete all of them in 5 years. Because I want to make sure that, to me, would be important, that we're confident that we can do them, what we're saying we can do, if we're going after this money.
My goal is to complete them, is to get them started and get them to the finish line. Again, I just need more support from engineering, and engineers don't necessarily have to be on staff too. We can also acquire support through consultancies.
Thank you.
And I would elaborate on that by saying we have one engineering vacancy that we're recruiting for, and then a second engineering division manager that the council has approved in the current budget that we're working on because it affects reporting relationships. We have an obligation to meet and discuss that with another bargaining group. So we're close to resolving and finishing those conversations, at which point we'll bring you the job description, the recommended salary, and then upon council's approval, go out and then try to find an engineering division manager to support the delivery of the project.
Thank you. I saw Councilmember Hall and then Hardy. I don't know if Councilmember Hall took his hand down.
Thank you. Just two more comments on this slide. I did like Councilmember Chateau's remarks, and thank you, Mr. Rincon, for responding back. And this goes back, I think, to Tom Belt's comments about understanding staff time and costs internally in our organization. It's extremely important. I know Mr. Prestwich and I have talked about different ways of trying to get to it. And it's not just for the water enterprise. It's for everything on this list. It's for public works in general. It's across the board. We use the same staff members across different departments for different things, not just projects like this that have clear price tags on them, but a lot of the other initiatives that we all are trying to get done across the board. We don't have a good understanding of our capacity to execute on anything. We have some sense. I think our department directors obviously have the best sense, and Mr. Rincon's gut, I'm sure, is probably uncomfortable, but he's got a huge project list ahead of him. But anyway, I think, so that's very, very critical going forward. The other issue is going back to Mr. Caldwell's comments about what is the full list of all the projects, not just all of these here, but everything else. So our community understands how much work we actually have ahead of us. And there are multiple ways to pay for all of that. The infrastructure, the financing civic infrastructure task force identified obviously hotels as critical components here. There's $10.5 or $11 million worth of stormwater right here on this list that could be funded through hotels or TOT or other things. And that same funding could go to buying more staff to help us execute the rest of this list much, much faster. So I just think stepping back and looking at how do we go after everything that we need to work on here in this city is such a critical component to this conversation. We're still just not getting to it. So I don't know what those pictures are, but we do need to come up with how to present it to the community as we work through our business planning here over the next 2 or 3 months.
Thank you. I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you. I have some questions for staff and some additional comments. First, on the 2 stormwater system projects identified for the conceptual bond, Director Rincon, do these projects include the kind of stormwater system upgrades that you described in your response to Councilmember Hall's question about what would be removing trash and pollution from the rivers and streams?
For any outfall, that would be true, especially for trash collection, because that's pretty much a requirement now. So if we're doing any replacement of pipelines that includes the outfall, that would definitely be included as a trash collection. But even before entering the system too, we just don't put in drop inlets anymore. We do trash separators so that we can actually collect the trash before it even enters the system, so that those get vacuumed out periodically as needed. And in terms of the stormwater system, replacing undersized portions of stormwater collection system, that's the focus where we're replacing pipelines, upsizing. So those we tear up the street and put in the new systems. The other part of replacement of approximately 1,500 or 15,000 feet, that is just looking at our system, age system. We do a survey, see what sections need to be lined, which sections need to be replaced. It's that kind of approach. So it's not necessarily a capacity issue, but it's more of wear and tear on the system.
But these projects would include the kind of trash collection separators and other things as just part of replacing or upgrading the lines. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. I mean, anytime you have a pipeline replacement program, you would include the drop inlets as well.
Thank you. That helps. So then going through the water list, I'm going to share some of my thoughts, and I don't know if there will be comments or clarifications from staff or not. I'm going to take what I think is pretty much a little or no risk in suggesting that Bell Canyon spillway repairs benefit the whole system and all the users. The water main replacement program, who benefits from that? I think it really depends on which part of the system is being replaced, whether it's more of a local benefit or more of a system-wide benefit. So I can't tell looking at that. The unfunded CIP projects list, they look to me like system improvements as opposed to local improvements. I do have a question for Director Rincon. What is the benefit to the lower reservoir rehab that's identified there?
Yes, that reservoir is a single reservoir. There is no redundancy there, and that reservoir has not been pulled out of service to be recoded or likewise, analyze structurally to see what improvements needed. So it's part of our water distribution system, a critical part of our water distribution system, and it's been in service since it was put in place in service. So it's just it's time to we'll have to operate around it, but it's time to address its needs.
Thank you. Fire flow improvements constructed within the city limits, I'm going to suggest really benefit residents of the city of St. Helena, if not entirely, then close to entirely.
That's a true statement, yes, because most of the older parts of the system are within the city limits.
Right, and I think the same thing's got to be true for a Cornell lift station, that benefits residents of the city directly. Sewer replacement, that one could think of that as a system-wide improvement, but if the sewer lines being replaced are in the city limits, I think the benefits are going to go essentially to residents of the city of St. Helena, and perhaps there's going to be some reduced leakage into the ground as well. Wastewater distribution, I think that's ultimately, to the extent that it reduces demand on our water supply, that's a system-wide benefit. I don't think there's any way to say that it benefits some water customers and not others. It provides water security for everybody. That's one of the reasons I think it's such an important project. So, those are my thoughts. I think it's really important for us to understand what we're looking at, be realistic about what these things do in terms of the equities involved, and to be open, direct, and transparent with our voters. Again, I think the net result of taking the approach that's proposed benefits the entire city of St. Helena, all the residents and taxpayers within it. And there is some overlapping benefit with some of these projects and the ratepayers, but I think that inequity with 15% of the customers and volume outside the city limits, when compared with the benefit to the city as a whole of a successful bond measure that includes stormwater, water system, and sewer system improvements, I think it makes sense. But thanks to staff for answering my questions, and I'm quite interested and eager to hear the thoughts of my fellow council members.
Councilmember Hardy, I do have a question in terms of organization and structure here with this list, and that we just went through. Are you comfortable with using this as the basis? And if somebody has a concern with one area of it, we address it using this as the framework, this structure right here?
Well, I'm comfortable with it as the sort of organizing list for purposes of this conversation. I'm not in a position here as I speak to know or be able to talk meaningfully about what an alternative list would look like. For that, I would be dependent on the city manager and the public works director. If we're talking about replacing one item with something else or just shortening the list and so on. But I think this is a great framework for trying to get that done. And I think if anyone has concerns about a particular line item on this list, now's the time to raise them myself.
Okay, thank you. Council members, any input here? And then I'll look to the city manager in terms of crafting that resolution that would dual track the bond issue, using this as the sort of the basis for it. Would that also be something that would come at on February 8th for a first reading?
We can bring that to you on February 8th. And in fact, you can, if you wanted to, if it evolved a little bit over time, you could revisit the list of projects because the city attorney, as the city attorney said, it will be written. It would be written in a somewhat flexible way. think the feedback we received at the prior meeting is that all of the investments, you would want to limit those investments to within the city limits. And so we would anticipate including that type of language in the ordinance. But the resolution could be brought at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Chateau.
Thank you. My question just is, since this is not the full 20 million that the bond would be, and we know that the costs can't be exact at this point, will there be some explanation of that on the document, or how is that typically handled?
We would need council direction to either use this 19149 number, for example, or a different number. And when I'm looking at the project list on a different screen here, just the additional water projects. There is a Kearney and Andrea water main replacement project for 1.1 million that's on the list. So that is a project that at the moment we have slated for incorporation into the water rates. But that is a project that could be moved here or swapped out, for example.
One other aspect I think is very important, and our discussions may place it somewhere else in terms of where its funding comes from, but the water meter upgrades, I think in our, hearing back from staff reflecting on what occurred last year, that replacement of the water metering system, that upgrading would be a significant benefit to staff time, et cetera. And so is that something that we could consider for this list, or do we feel that we have funding laid out for that that might work better coming through the revenue bond?
So right now we have those slated for water rates. We have customers inside the city and also customers outside the city that will benefit as well as the city will benefit. We do spend we spend an inefficient amount of hours. The hours that we spend reading meters and rechecking meters is not the best use of our time, and it will save us money in the long term.
So if it's more appropriate for that to come for the rates, I guess my concern is making sure that happens sooner rather than later. And in our strategy to move something like that forward, just wanting to make sure that it's moving because I do think we recognize that will make a big difference.
Right, and the way that we've set this up, I think we have design starting in year one, and there's infrastructure that needs to be deployed to support this, along with funding the deployment of that over the first 3 years, within the first 3 years of the new rates.
Okay, and I see Councilmember Chateau and then Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Has there been any thinking about the water penalties paying for that? I think it was 2 million for the smart meter upgrade.
We've talked about the concept internally. There is a nice nexus there, and I do think that that's a reasonable approach to considering an approach to funding the water meters that might be able to be funded outside of the water rates.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hardy, and then Councilmember Hall.
Thanks. Mr. Prestwich, could you go back to the slide, or could someone on staff show us again the slide of the water CIPs that are already funded from the last rate study? Okay, so that includes the intake tower, pump station at Rutherford, and the Dwyer Road pump station. And then I see smart water meters would go into the upcoming rate study. Thank you. I just wanted to check that out. Thanks.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. I was just thinking about the the issues in the Napa pipe and the Rutherford pump station. We just hadn't had any update. I know it isn't necessarily a separate agenda item here tonight, but I'm just hoping that there's money available if we need it today to help get that repaired and water flowing again. Perhaps Mr. Rincon could just give a quick update.
Yes, we've ordered a replacement pump to be able to handle the low intake pressures and the high output pressure. So a new pump has been ordered. I don't have a delivery date on that. Of course, we're all suffering from, just the supply issues. So we hope to get that in place within 3 months.
Within 3 months?
Yeah, but don't hold me to that, please, because something may happen. It may be stuck out in the port of Oakland or something like that.
Okay, but do we expect water through that pipe sooner than that?
Right, as it's currently operating, no. But once Hennessy goes into production, then we'll overcome the problem.
Okay.
Right. There are two potential ways that we can move quicker, and that is one, when the switches turn from Jameson to Hennessy, that's when the pressure will be restored. Or alternatively, when Napa installs an interim pump at the Dwyer Road pump station, which they're actively working on as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I think we're hearing support for moving forward on this ballot question that's a little more all-encompassing in looking at the storm drains, water, and sewer. The date of the 8th is what we're working towards. And I just want to check in with the Vice Mayor Doring. Do you have any thoughts at this point?
Well, I think that the council has articulated the struggle we're having on the fairness issues and the political questions that we face and the urgencies we face. My thinking is fairly aligned with Councilmember Hardy's. I'm glad that he articulated the issues in the way he did. I think he's made a good case for really a balanced approach is what we're doing here. I think we're sort of spreading the pain and trying to deal with these issues of equity and urgency that we face. And there's unknowns for sure. There's worst case scenarios, best case scenarios. So I'm aligned with his thinking on how we approach the issue. I do appreciate Dr. Mitz bringing forth the various policies that we have. Some of them are competing with one another, and part of the sort of information that we have to incorporate into our thinking. So yeah, I'm aligned with the council. I'm supportive of the direction we're going for the reasons that have been stated by all.
Thank you. So with that, I'll look to our city manager, and I believe you've got direction from council, and I'm certainly open to additional council comment. What I want to make sure is as we get towards the 8th, we get as close as possible to what we need. And so if there are any additional suggestions, tweaks, et cetera, just in terms from your perspective, Mr. Presswich, councils, if somebody wakes up tomorrow morning realizing something that they feel needs to be in there, and then whatever is synthesized, when before, well, I guess if the 8th is the date that we need to have this on, and there's any additional information from council, do you have a sort of it wouldn't really be a hard cutoff. I'm sure somebody could bring something up at the last moment, but we want to make sure this gets as synthesized as possible so that we don't go sideways as we get closer. What are your thoughts? Oh yeah, Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. I was just thinking, Mr. Mayor, did you have any comments on the list yourself?
I'm comfortable with where it's looking, and it looks pretty balanced to me. I'll certainly do another review, but I feel like when I'm looking at things like the sewer replacement program, to me that's broad, and I like that because that's going to do a lot for the community. Another part of this that I like is that if we have to go under the roads for one of these aspects, whether it's the sewer, whether it's the storm drains, then we would have the funding to do the other things that underneath the ground that may need work at the same time. I do grasp the concept of the recycled water benefiting not just folks in the city, also outside the city. But if I'm hearing Councilmember Hardy, that the overall benefit is such that, and you could correct me if I'm wrong in how I was hearing, that the overall benefit of that would weigh in an equitable enough way. Am I hearing that correctly, Councilmember Hardy?
Well, I mean, you've got the gist of it. My sense is that the approach we're taking is in the best interests of the city of St. Helena and everyone who lives in it. I don't think we are distorting the equation in terms of who's benefiting from projects paid for exclusively through the general obligation bond so much that that concern outweighs the adverse consequences that this city faces if we're unable to fund all those stormwater system improvements.
Thank you. And so if for Councilmember Hall, if that answers to some degree, I'm looking at the water main replacement program, the sewer replacement program, the recycled water and storm drains, so that if we do go in, we can be comprehensive and know that we've got the funding. And then also looking at things like the CIP projects, anything relating to those, the transmission of water from Bell Canyon or up from Rutherford, anything that's adding to our water security. I do think the case being made that 15% of the users and the water is going outside of city limits, but I'll go back to Councilmember Hardy's, the overall benefit does benefit the city. So that's where I am. I'm comfortable with this list, and I'll review it again, but I'm comfortable looking at it as it is now.
Yeah, thank you. I just didn't. I actually didn't think you had a chance to speak earlier, so thank you.
No, I appreciate it. Mr.
So we
City
just clarify one little issue that was on my mind. I think that Councilmember Hall used the term secret issues, and I don't know if he really meant that. Maybe he meant something that's undisclosed or unknown. I don't think we have. Maybe I misheard him with the reception. I just want to make sure that that is not something of concern to the community, and maybe he was meaning something that is undiscovered as of now, potentially. I don't know. I just want clarification there.
Thank you. I mentioned secret issues.
Vice Mayor Doring, we have you're mute.
I may have misheard you. I thought they were maybe referring to issues that we don't know about or something like that yet in the CIP. I apologize if I heard something wrong.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. I don't know if others heard that. I do have a cold, so I know my voice.
I just wanted to clarify that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I thought I was like, well, what's that all about? Okay, thank you.
No, I have no idea. I can't even think of any secret issues. I think the only thing I was referencing that isn't necessarily in front of us on the list tonight was just looking at this idea of a whole comprehensive list of everything that we're working on across the board, and how do we get better at understanding our capacity to deliver against that list internally.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, Mr. Presswich, do you feel you have direction on what to work forward on towards the 8th?
Right, and I do have one clarification I want to make sure we receive feedback on. In terms of next steps, what we would do is present to you a draft ordinance on February 8th, at the meeting of February 8th. It would need to be, the ballot question and the ordinance needs to be finalized that night. So if we are changing numbers, we will need to change numbers in the documents as well. And so it's helpful to, I think we haven't seen a lot of discussion about, I'm thinking about moving a number or moving a project. So I think we're clear on the projects, which is helpful. But if we do move any projects, we'll need to update numbers that night before adoption of that ordinance. We would also, and this is the area I need formal direction on, we would intend to bring you back an edit to your financial policy that also allows for voter approved funding strategies to be deployed as well. So we'll work with the city attorney to develop that language. It would look similar, I imagine, to what we shared with you tonight, but he hasn't had a chance to take a look at that. And we would bring you the implementing resolutions necessary for placement of the measure on the June ballot.
So tonight you would need some clarification in terms of direction on that policy question.
Just want to-
make consensus.
Just want to, our recommendation would be if there's interest in placing this measure on the ballot, that we would recommend recommended adjustments to the policy to accommodate voter approved funding strategies.
So that's something I'm in favor of. I'll look to the council to see if we've got consensus on that. Yes, so seeing that, so we can move forward with that as well. Is there anything else from council at this point? I mean, I think for staff, if somebody does wake up and realize they think something needs to shift or be adjusted, I'd say the sooner the better, just to make this as streamlined as possible. And that goes for the community too, if you have input to send it. But Mr. Presswich, do you feel now that you've got what you need?
Yes, thank you.
Are there any other comments, input from council? Well, really appreciate everybody's focus and working forward together on this. We'll look forward to something that we can really be proud of and move a lot forward with. So thank you very much. Thank you, staff. And then Mr. Deeker, thank you for being here with us as well. Really appreciate it. And all of our staff members for all the hard work. So thank you. And the council.
Not all.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.